I'm Franz, and this is another episode of The Interesting People of Christ Church. So, our guest today is not only an interesting person, but most would say a saint of Christ Church. And so our guest today is Mary Christiano, or as we like to call her, Saint Mary of Christiano. Mary, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Thank you, Franz.
You are very welcome. I mean, it's so true. You do so much here and have done so much here for so long. Thank you for joining us.
Sure, I'm happy to be here.
Who are you? And why are you a saint?
Well, I don't know about the saint part. I am from New York. We was born in upstate New York and got my teaching degree in SUNY at Potsdam. Moved down to Long Island after I got married and taught in the Seaford Public Schools. I'm a music teacher by trade and mother and housewife and just all around professional volunteer is what my kids call me.
Well, we can certainly attest to that here,
Okay.
For sure. There's hardly a ministry at Christ Church or a volunteer opportunity that doesn't have your name on the label, so to speak.
That's just because I've been around a while.
Well, let's start with, so you said you grew up in upstate New York.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about your life growing up. Did you have brothers or sisters? What did that look like?
Well, I come from a musical family. Both my parents are musicians. My dad was my orchestra teacher from third grade through high school. My mother was a pianist, organist, saxophone player. My parents had a dance band. That's how they met, and they always had weekend jobs playing dances. So I had two brothers and one sister, so there was four of us. And my parents always said they wanted four because they wanted a string quartet. So we were obliged to learn stringed instruments. I was the violist. My sister and one brother were the violinist, and my other brother was a cellist. So, because my dad always said at his funeral he wanted a string quartet to play. And the only way he could assure that was to have four kids to play string quartet.
That's a great way to save money on your funeral costs,
Yes,
too. You know?
Yeah. So I grew up in Johnson City, New York, and my parents were not of the same faith. My mother was Episcopalian, and we were raised in the church, and my father was Roman Catholic. So at that time, you had to say that the children of a marriage were be brought up in the Roman Catholic faith. Well, my mother was the children's education director at All Saints Episcopal Church in Johnson City. That's where Ken came from.
Really?
Yes.
Really? I had no idea.
So we have a history there, though I had married and left before he came to All Saints, but we had some common history there. So up until the age of 7, I attended church with my mother because she was the children's worship director and she ran the nursery. And my dad didn't want to have 4 little rugrats running around the church. So at the age of 7, then I started going to the Roman Catholic Church with my dad. Well, he said, he was the choir director there. He said, I have 4 singers. You are going to be in my choir. So after the 9 o'clock service, where we sang in the choir at the All Saints Church, we would go to the 11 o'clock service at Blessed Sacrament and sing in their choir. So every Sunday, I got to go to 2 churches.
That, most kids, that's the nightmare scenario. Not 1, but 2 churches, come on. But it sounds like, from what you described, you're a musical family. Did you enjoy that?
Yes.
Being able to participate in I think being involved helps a lot too. When you're not just, sitting there bored with,
Right.
with nothing to do, or if you're involved in Sunday school or something like that, that helps a lot.
It does. And it was actually lots of fun to see how both religions worked and then compared them. So when it came time to, as an adult, to choose, it's like, well, I've got the basis in both. What do I want to do and to raise my family in it? But that's how I ended up here.
That is so fascinating. Tell me a little bit about Johnson City, New York. I'm really not familiar with it. I'm not quite familiar with a whole lot of upstate New York.
Okay.
I mean, when people think New York, they're probably going to think like the John Steinberg interview or the big city. What's it like population-wise? Was it kind of a smaller area? Was it
Yes.
larger?
It was small. Endicott Johnson was the big employer when I was growing up, and they made shoes. It was a shoe factory town. And then as I got older, IBM moved in, and of course they had a big facility on the north side of town. Johnson City was like the Nixa to Springfield. To Binghamton was the big city.
Okay.
And then Endicott and Endwell were other little suburbs of Binghamton. So it was called the Triple Cities in that area. It was
the
a nice,
Trinity.
Yeah.
What can we say? We can tie it all together.
But it was a rural, in a way, because, just outside of town, there were farms with cattle and cows, mostly dairy. So it was a very easy childhood.
That sounds like a really good mix of you have some attachment to the bigger city life and probably diverse, I'm assuming as well, but at the same time you get kind of that bit of a small town vibe
Right.
as well. That I'm sure that was beneficial, Let me ask you, were there ever it's interesting having parents grow up in the two different churches. And was that ever a real conflict, or did you ever experience any tension between either the churches
No,
dealing
not
with
really.
that? They're all pretty cool with it all?
Yeah. In fact, in that town, there was a lot of families. Now, not only was there Roman Catholic, Episcopalian, we had a Jewish synagogue, and we had a lot of Ukrainian and not Lutheran, okay, can't think of the word right now, but Ukrainian Orthodox. So we had a lot of different varieties, and every Wednesday, those of us in, I think it's second grade is when it started, we would go to religious instruction. You would leave the public schools and walk to your church for your religious instruction.
Interesting.
It was. It was like, okay, this is fun. We get out of school, but we get to go to another school. So.
Well, that's so neat,
Yeah.
and that's very different
Yes, it was.
from today. So you did attend essentially like a public school,
Oh, yes.
but you had the opportunity to go, I'm assuming, to the Episcopal church there, or was it the Roman Catholic one?
Well, we were allowed to go to the Roman Catholic Church for religious instruction. And our good friend Lauren Dan went to the Jewish temple for his religious instruction. So it was just, everybody did that. You just got out of school early on Wednesday and went to the church.
That's so neat. That is so neat.
I don't know if they still do it, but, that was back in the 50s and 60s.
Tell me a little bit. So you go to these two separate churches growing up. You have this musical background. What was high school like, and then what did you do after you graduated high school?
Well, I was on the music track just because I guess from an early age it was like, you're going to be a music teacher. I was like, okay. So I did at that time you could be in the chorus and the band and the orchestra. So I did all three. And, from marching band to singing in the choral, the choirs, and then, of course, playing in the orchestra. It was a very solid beginning to become a music teacher.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot. I can't think of many kids that I know that are involved in three separate music projects like that at once.
Yeah, they don't.
And coming also from a background where you're playing in two churches. So... yeah, a prodigy in the making.
Well, I don't know, but it gave me a good work ethic. It's like, yeah, this is what you need to do. If you need to be on the football field at 6 a.m. to practice marching band, and then you have, choir, and then orchestra was in the afternoon. So I was just surrounded by music.
What was the most enjoyable thing about music for you?
Oh, golly. I really enjoyed playing in the large groups. So when we had a concert band, I did the alto clarinet, and marching band was the regular clarinet. Orchestra played viola and violin as they needed. And of course, singing was just always there.
I did not know you were a clarinet player. I was a clarinet player.
Ah,
Not a very good one, but I did it. And then eventually moved on to bass clarinet for a while, and then kind of fell out of that and went to guitar. But yeah, clarinet's a fun instrument.
it was. Well, I didn't have the wind power to do oboe.
You know, I found bass, particularly with the lower notes, gets really, really tough to play. I wasn't quite prepared for that, but that's awesome. So is the bigger projects like the bigger band sort of stuff?
Yeah,
that you really enjoy?
in symphonies. We, as I got into high school, then we played in the youth symphony, which we would travel to Binghamton, and that was a combined symphony. And, that was good training as I get on to college and playing in the symphonies there. And and then later on with the Bayshore Symphony. So it was good, basic, solid training.
Continuing where we left off, Mary. So you've had all this band experience. You've been in 2 churches and 2 choirs. You've played in orchestras. You've played in marching band. You are ready now to do something, to become a music teacher, to pursue this. So I'm taking I think you mentioned you went to university afterwards. So
Right.
So remind me again, where did you attend? And I'm assuming you majored in music.
Yes, I went to SUNY Potsdam, the State University of New York at Potsdam. My choir director had graduated from Potsdam. And in New York, you have 2 music schools that are in the public school system. You have Fredonia and Potsdam. So he was a Potsdam graduate, so he just kept pushing me, go to Potsdam, go to Potsdam. And I was like, fine. So I applied and was accepted and went up there, and that's, we got my bachelor's in music education, and then got a job down in Seaford.
Okay, so after you got your bachelor's, what did you do in Seaford?
Oh, I had orchestra, grade 3 through 6. Started in instrumental music, and then I was there for 3 years, and then they went on strike. And
The students or the
No.
teachers?
the teachers went on strike. And at that point, the school system said, I'm sorry, we're going to eliminate, we can't have all the music programs we had, because they had a band program, they had the orchestra, and they had a choral program. So they cut the orchestra program, and
As they always seem
yeah,
to.
so I lost that job. But that was when I decided, well, if I need to, and at that time you had to have a master's degree within 3 years of graduation. So I went to Hofstra University to get my master's.
Okay, I want to rewind here just a little bit. You never
Sure.
know what kind of saucy drama you're going to get into with these interviews. So the teachers, I'm assuming, went on strike, probably for pay reasons or something.
It was a big, at that time, the unions were very, very powerful in New York, and of course they still are. So when they said we're going on strike, and I'm not sure exactly myself what the issues were, they just told us we were not allowed to go into school. And
Wow.
they had picket lines, and they stopped the buses from taking the kids in. It was really scary too.
Yes, I can imagine, as a working adult, that's a nightmare, that you lose your job because of a strike that you may not even be involved in.
Right.
And your program is one that's historically on the chopping block. Now, as a kid, there were probably shouts of glee from this strike at the time, depending on what kind of kid you were. But wow, that's really unfortunate. Now, the other thing I wanted to go back to is you said now you had to have a master's degree within 3 years. You said this was common practice at the time.
Yes.
So once you graduate with your bachelor's, it's like you have to pursue the master's within 3 years or you can't pursue it.
Right.
Now, did that apply just to that university, or did that apply pretty much all over?
That was a state qualification in New York.
Wow.
So
So you would have had to probably gone out of state then if you wanted to, let's say it was 4 years or 5 years, to
Yeah.
pursue your master's. Wow. Was there a reasoning behind that?
I think they just wanted to make sure that the teachers were qualified and that you had to continue on your with education. And at that time, team teaching was the big, I don't know, to do. And so when I had to go get my master's, they had paired me with an art history and, what was the other gal? I think it was English literature. So we were a team, and we had to do team teaching. So I went ahead and got my master's in humanities. So I'd have the art history, and I'd also have some English that I could help teach with.
Wow. I mean, again, it's called the Interesting People of Christ Church for a reason. That is quite the resume.
Well,
That's impressive. Let me ask you. So during this time that you're teaching in these schools, you're going through college. What was your relationship with the Episcopal Church like at that point?
non-existent.
Non-existent. I imagine you're very busy.
Well, my husband and I got married right after I graduated, and he was already working in New York City. So when we moved to Long Island, I would attend church with his mom, who was Polish, and she was going to the Roman Catholic Church. I did not understand a word because it was all in Polish, but I did have the Roman Catholic background, so I could follow along. But it wasn't really, we weren't attending regularly.
Gotcha. And so you guys met in college, I'm assuming.
Yes.
How did you meet?
Oh, at a dance.
Imagine that. It
How
involved
about
music.
that? Yes.
Who would have thunk?
Yeah, my husband he went to Clarkson College, which is the male technical college in Potsdam. And of course, across the river was the women's teachers college. So up in northern New York, right on the border of Canada, there's not much to do in the winter. So they would have social events, and he was working on the social events for the Clarkson College, and they had a dance at the Union. Well, my girlfriend said, well, let's go down and go to this dance. And I said, okay. I didn't really want to go that night, but she was chasing the fella and wanted to go, and he was in the band. So I said, all right, I'll go with you. So as soon as we got there, she dumped me and she went off to chase the band member. And my husband-to-be said, you were standing there, so I asked you to dance. I think we danced 2 dances. He said, you want to get out of here? He's not a dancer. So we left and, just walked around the campus, and then that was the beginning. Yeah.
The rest is history. That's really sweet. That's really sweet. Yeah, that's almost how every prom or dance story goes. I don't want to go. And then you go and you find someone. Oh, that's kind of romantic in a sense. And you've kept him around all this time.
Yes. Next year will be our 50th anniversary.
Wow. That's truly amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, and besides, if you get one trained, you don't want to break in another.
That's true. I'm sure that's true. I'm just happy that Caitlin's put up with me for almost 5 years. I mean, that's an achievement in and of itself. So, well, okay. Well, so let's go back around. So you don't have a real strong relationship with the Episcopal Church. Your school has just went on strike. You've lost your job. What happens next?
Well, at that time, New York City had the big blackout. And my husband, who's an electrical engineer, worked for Con Edison. And he was doing the analysis of the big blackout. And at that time, I got pregnant with my first daughter. So while in the middle of writing my master's thesis, I needed an extension. So I took her into the dean, and I said, this is my extension. I need another year. He granted that so I could finish the thesis. And at that time, David decided it was time to move out of the New York City environments, and started looking for a job. And he was hired for city utilities, so we moved out here. you know.
Probably not quite as crazy from an electrical standpoint as New York, I'm imagining. Just taking a wild guess.
Well, it took me a year to slow down to this tempo of life out here. He was hired as the planning director for city utilities. So he planned all the electric system and water and gas for the, quote, 20 years in the future. So things that are coming online now is what he did when he first got here.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That is so cool. I'm also grateful because I don't have power lines in my neighborhood. They're all underground. That's wonderful. I love that. So be sure to tell David I said thank you in that sense.
I'll be happy to. Yeah.
Now I do imagine that, was that a bit of a culture shock? I mean,
was.
everyone asks this when they come from the coast, to the Midwest. Like, you said it took you a while to kind of slow down, because I know the stereotype of New York is everything is very fast, everyone's quick. Did you kind of experience any of those weird kind of cultural things when you moved down here?
Oh, yes, definitely. But the one saving grace is Springfield is very much like the town I grew up in. If you go outside the city limits, there's cows, and there's farming communities around. And remember, when we moved here in '78, it was not as busy as it is now, and it was much calmer. But yeah, it still took me a year to slow down and not drive fast. It's like,
okay, so you've gone to your dean, you've got this extension. Cute kids are great for that. I mean, you want to bribe someone, you got a cute baby, that's the way to go, right there.
I just needed more time.
So you've moved here. Was there any? Now, aside from just David getting that job with city utilities, did you have any ties that binded you here? Any family?
No.
So this is just kind of a blind move to Missouri.
Yes, all of my family is still in New York. So,
okay.
Yeah, it was like when Dave got the call to come out to see city utilities, come out and visit, he was like, "Get the map out. I got to find out where this place is. Where is Missouri?" So, I mean, anything west of the Hudson doesn't exist.
Okay, so now you're now here in Missouri.
Right.
You're working on this extension. What happens after that? Do you finish out your master's degree,
yeah.
and where do you go from there?
Well, I finished the master's and got my degree mailed to me because I didn't go back for the graduation ceremony. It was a little too far. Plus, I had Danielle. But when we moved out here, bought our house and started to settle in, I was like, okay, I think I need to find a church. So, being raised in both, I visited St. Agnes, Trinity, and of course IC, which was right on the at the St. John's location.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd take Danielle with me, and of course she's a baby, she's fussy and crying, and I got some dirty looks and was like, all right, this is not the place for us. So then I visited St. James, and it was like they were in their charismatic moment.
Ah, yeah, I've heard of such.
And it was like, that's not quite what I'm used to. So I came over to Christ to see what the Sunday was like here. Well, to walk in, this was very, very similar, even the layout of the church that I grew up in. So it felt like home. And Fran Wilkie, bless her soul, walked up to me and said, "You're new." And she just welcomed me in and said, "We need some help on the altar guild. Would you like to help us?" And that's how that started.
And thus the birth of St. Mary of Christiano. Wow, okay, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
The fact that you mentioned that, you tried all these different churches, that's something that I've heard from several people about their experience at Christ Church. Mm-hmm. And this even came from when I interviewed Nancy Ayton. It's been the same for a very, very long time. Mm-hmm. And it's not ever gone, like through a charismatic phase that I'm familiar with. Architecturally, it's been the same for a very, very long time. Mm-hmm. And that was something that her and I kind of discussed, is you don't see a lot of that. There's usually a lot of different transitions and some experimentation, and not that Christ Church hasn't expanded or done anything, but it's very stable. I think is a way that most people have described it to me.
Oh, the biggest, kerfuffle we had was moving the altar out away from the back. So, I mean, that was a big deal. But no, it is. It's very welcoming. So it was like, oh, we found our home, and we've been here ever since.
Okay, so continuing where we left off last. So you guys had moved to Missouri. You decided, let's kind of get involved in the church again. You've tried a few things out. You've come to Christ Church. Now you're part of the Altar Guild. So where does life kind of take you from here now?
Okay. Well, when we first moved out here, of course, Dave had a job, but he said, are you going to get your teaching certificate? And because I'm permanently certified in New York. Mm-hmm. But out here it was like, okay, well, let me look into it. So I would have to take in 9 hours of Missouri history and law. And I was like, okay, well, I'll go sign up over at MSU. And at that time, I got pregnant with my second child. So I said, well, let's put this on hold for a while. And we decided to wait. And since he had a good job, and I could stay home with the girls, and he was like, all right, well, it's time to go back and teach. Okay, let's go look at it. And then the 2 boys came along. So it's like, all right, this is not meant to be.
Children just have a way of doing that.
Yeah. So by the time we looked at financially, if I went back to school, of course, then I had to get all my teaching clothes again, get a babysitter for 4 kids. It was like, this is financially not worth it.
No.
So.
And I'm assuming this is probably, what year? This is probably early.
It was in the 80s.
Or, yeah. I mean, childcare is just expensive. It's just crazy. And even now, I have friends that it didn't make sense for my best friend to send their kid to daycare because his wife's job basically paid for daycare, right. And that's it. And I'm sure, especially with 4 children, even being 1980, I'm sure that just doesn't make sense.
Right. Financially, it wasn't something that was like, all right, I will stay home, we'll raise the kids, and I'll be the traditional housewife. Except I did a lot of volunteering with the schools and the PTAs, and it was, that kept me busy.
So you don't strike me as I mean, you're just such a workaholic, Mary. I was going to say that you don't strike me as the type that would probably be real comfortable with that very long.
No, not too long. So I spent 20 years with the Springfield Public Schools working in different jobs with them, not job, but volunteering. So I kept my fingers in all the teaching aspects of it. I knew all the teachers. I knew all my kids' friends because I was in the buildings.
And you could probably keep an eye on them too.
Yes.
So you're doing all this volunteer work. You're doing stuff for the public schools. You're doing stuff for Christ Church. Mm-hmm. You're raising 4 kids, correct?
Yes.
At what point do your kids grow up, and where does life kind of take you and David from there?
Well, we never stayed home.
It sounds like it.
When we got married, we did our honeymoon in Europe. And we decided that every 2 years we would go back. So, and we travel every 2 years. We'll do 1 year here in the States, visiting, seeing some things, and then 1 year traveling. And it has taken us from almost all the Europeans, cities and countries, a lot of South American countries, and a lot of that has been hunting plants, because my husband is a bromeliad grower, and that's his hobby. So when we go away, we would go visit nurseries, go out in the wild, collecting plants. We have our import permits, and just travel around the world.
That is fascinating, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because not only, do you do just a little bit of everything around here, but you're also one of the people of Garden Guild, and we have a lovely garden. And I think most people know that you have a green thumb, but I think they would be surprised to know how much of a green thumb you guys have, and just like how much you know about plants and growing. And do do you want to help me with my garden at my house? Sure. It's awful. I don't know squat. but like, so what are some, so tell us a little bit about that. Like, so what do you do when you go to these countries? You said it's vermilion grower. It's like a pineapple, isn't it?
Yes.
Sort of. It's like in that family.
Yes, the pineapple is the one edible plant in the bromeliad family. The other one people know is Spanish moss, which grows all over through the South.
Okay.
But we have a greenhouse, and we grow this plant family. There's a few orchids thrown in there and a few African violets, but mostly bromeliads.
That is so cool. How did you guys get involved in that? Did David come like from a family that was interested in plants, or did you? Or?
Well, his family was gardeners.
Okay.
His dad always had a vegetable garden. And as we got into the genealogy of his family, we went to Italy, where his family's from, in Carpenzano, and we knew his great-grandfather was a farmer. Well, we didn't know he owned the farm, which is a huge mountainside, really. And we got to go to the family farm and see where his great-grandfather was born and where his dad, they had farmed for a long time. So gardening's always been in his blood. But as to bromeliads, we were on Long Island. They have the Long Island Horticultural Society, and Dave was president. So we got to do a lot of things horticulturally. And one of the programs was a gentleman talking about bromeliads. Well, they're a rather unusual family. So Dave got excited about them and started, okay, well, let's do this. So our first greenhouse was a converted porch on the back of our house in Levittown. And we had a great time and went to South America collecting some plants from Brazil and Costa Rica. And then on the way back, they lost power and we lost the whole greenhouse. It froze.
Oh, no.
So we learned our lesson, got generators and kerosene heaters, so we wouldn't have that ever again. Then when we moved out here, the first thing we did was to build a greenhouse for the collection of plants.
Wow, that is so cool.
You'll have to come over sometime and see.
I would love. I've been told you guys have an absolutely crazy garden greenhouse setup, so I would love to see that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that is just so neat. And again, the whole purpose of this is like, who would have known? Who would have thought?
Yeah.
Well, kind of tying back around to some more
Okay.
faith-based stuff. So, what do you think drew you more to the Episcopal Church? I mean, because you've had, you've kind of grown up, it sounds like, in a very pluralistic city, like a bit of a melting pot. You've been involved in the Roman Catholic Church. You've been to the Polish version of that. You've been in the Episcopal Church. What kind of called you and brought you back here, do you think?
The liturgy and just the familiarity of it, and the people. It's a very welcoming group here. So it was just, but I missed the communion and the liturgy, and that was what brought us back.
Well, that's awesome. And, I can speak to that, too, in the sense that we do, I think, have, like, some of the nicest, most down-to-earth, normal people that you could ask, from a church. And when I started here, that was my experience. I was just shocked at just by, like, it's just normal people. You don't find anyone that's, very posh and high and mighty, scuffs their nose at you, and or anyone who's just like overly charismatic. They are just kind, decent, neat people. And what I've learned from doing this is just diverse. Everyone has just so many cool stories and backgrounds. And I think that's part of what makes this church so special, is just the great melting pot of people that we have from so many different backgrounds and states and stories and things like that.
I agree.
And it's people like you that also like reinforce that, and I think make that great. I mean, everyone will say, Mary Christiano is a saint. She's one of the nicest people. She does a little bit of everything. So thank you, Mary, because I think you add to that
Well,
welcoming, loving culture we have here.
I hope to.
So something we got to come back around to.
Okay.
You said you had some trouble adjusting to the speed limit around here.
Yes.
You also have a BMW M3.
Right.
One of my dream cars. Are you the little old lady from Pasadena?
I've not so much anymore. But I was known to have a red Acura that had a VTEC engine in it, and I could make it across the state in about 3 hours.
Do you know who Gay McKeenan is?
No, I
Are
don't.
you familiar with her? Also, that song might have been written about her as well.
Oh.
Had drag raced Corvettes, biggest car person you'll ever meet. You should really talk to her sometime because
Okay.
I bet you two would have an absolute hoot of a time.
Well, and we don't have just the BMW. Dave has the 914 Porsche too.
Oh.
So,
Ooh, I didn't know you were part of the Porsche club.
yes.
Oh, I am jealous of that. I loved my Nissan 350Z that I had when I started here. Great car. I don't know, have you ever drove? You or Dave ever drove
A Nissan?
any of the like the Datsun 240 or anything like that?
We had a 240Z.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Did you love it?
No.
No. Did you feel every bump in the road ever?
Yes.
Yes. That's pretty common from them. That's a little different than with my Camaro that I have now. A much smoother ride, but I miss it. I mean, you just touch the pedal and it feels like you're going to rip off the pavement.
Well, I think that's why he likes the Porsche, because they can do autocrossing in it. And, it goes. So, but that's his deal, and because it's really low to the ground. And as I get older, I can't get in and out of it.
Yeah. Everyone's, that is into cars at a young age wants the low to the ground, fun, feel every bump sort of thing. And then as you get older, Mercedes and Cadillac sounds a little bit more appealing.
I'm very happy with my Prius.
Well, these interviews go anywhere. Who would have thought we'd end up talking about cars and plants and church, and it's just a grab bag of everything.
Yeah.
Like I said in the first one, this is throw at the wall. We talk about everything here. So, well, what would you say, Mary, to someone who might be kind of interested in church or maybe the Episcopal Church, but they don't know a whole lot about it or they're just not quite sure? What would you say to encourage someone to give Christ Church a shot or reconnect or come back to it? What has really touched you in your life that's brought you in here and kept you around for as long as you've been here and involved in so many things?
Well, if someone was interested, I'd say come and see. Just come and see. Try it and see what you think. And once you get here, there are so many opportunities of things to do. And once you get involved, you find your niche, whether it's helping with the food for the funeral ministries, if it's out in the garden pulling weeds, if it's working at the altar. There is so much. Singing in the choir. There is so much you could do and choose from. We have outreach ministries. There is so much. If you have a not just a talent, but just a curiosity about how can I help in the world, we can find a spot for you.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I mean, I can attest to that as well. I mean, we have so many ministries. I just sent a list to someone the other day, and I was like, wow, we do a lot here. There's a lot of stuff going on. Mm-hmm. And I'm assuming, you're probably involved in so many of these things because they probably brought meaning to your life. Mm-hmm. I'm sure as well.
Yeah, I love the music program here.
And I think a lot of our members do too, which if you're watching this and you like big choir, the authentic church choir experience, we do have a phenomenal choir, which you are also a director of. Mm-hmm. and Mary is wonderful. I mean, she is Saint Christiano for a reason. So if you're watching this and you're not a member of Christ Church, but you love music, at least come and just check that aspect of it out.
Yeah, I mean, having the junior choir, of course, it's dwindled with COVID. So, give us a break. But, you know, as we get back and we have the two choirs, the junior choir and the senior choir, yeah, it's really very fulfilling to go, and actually we can do some major works, you know, classical stuff that you don't get everywhere in churches these days. So
No, it's a very different experience. I grew up a Jehovah's Witness, and you know, we get the cassette tape out, put it in, hit play, you know, and that everyone is the choir, and you know, then you have praise bands and stuff like that, and that's all fine. But being here and like really listening to the choir, and my big experience with it was doing the lessons and carols videos with you guys and recording that. I mean, it's beautiful. It's a different, if it's something that you haven't experienced before, it's just a different feeling in a worship setting. Especially like Christmas Eve this year or last year, beautiful. Just absolutely beautiful, and just adds so much meaning to the services, I think.
well, the history, you know, was way back, you know, to having music to enhance worship. And that's what, you know, we try and do.
Well, I think, I mean, not to, you know, toot our own horn here, no pun intended musically, but no, I think that Christ Church does a really good job of that. And I think, again, you know, it's because we have people like you and Dr. Sorensen and Kenny K-Back and Aubrey Smith, just so many talented musicians here, and so many talented singers. We are very, very fortunate in that respect. Oh my gosh. Well, Mary, thank you so much for coming and doing this today. This has definitely been an interesting conversation. And I hope you had a great time.
I did.
Mary, thank you again for doing this. It's been a great pleasure. And we'll have to race sometime.
Okay.